"Let go of the boy." She said it once. No screaming, no begging, no hesitation. Just 5 feet 6 inches of a black woman, standing between a grown man and a child on a late-night subway car, with no witnesses, no backup, and nothing in her hands except the absolute certainty that she was not moving. The man looked at her. He actually smiled. Like she was the funniest thing he had seen all week. Like she had no idea what she had just stepped into. Like the outcome of the next 60 seconds was already decided, and she was simply too foolish to know it yet. He was wrong. Because what that man did not know, what none of them knew standing in that flickering subway car at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, was that the woman in front of him had spent 11 years walking into rooms where children were not safe. She had done it in courthouses and crisis centers and condemned apartments and hospital hallways. She had done it tired, underpaid, and unsupported. She had done it on days when everything in her wanted to turn around. She had never once turned around. So when that man smiled, she didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She looked him dead in the eyes and she said it again, quieter this time, which was somehow worse. "Let go of the boy." And then the phone hit the floor. And the call connected. And a voice came through that speaker so low, so still, so completely unbothered by the laws of fear that ordinary people lived under, that the smile disappeared off that man's face like it had never been there at all. One word came through that phone. Just one. "Son, welcome to Afro Korean Tales and Stories, the home of Afro-Korean love stories where passion crosses cultures and hearts learn new languages." If you're new here, this channel is dedicated to powerful, emotional stories between Black women and Korean men, filled with romance, tension, longing, and moments that stay with you long after the story ends. And to our returning family, welcome back. Your love, comments, and support keep these stories alive. Before the story continues, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale. Now tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And what part of this story is already pulling at your heart? Let's connect. Let's feel the story together. The hand dropped. The other man took one full step backward. And within 4 minutes, 3 black SUVs were sitting outside that station. And the most feared Korean crime boss in the city was walking down those subway stairs like a man who had never once in his life needed to rush for anything. Now here is what nobody tells you about the moment that changes your life. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with music. It doesn't come with a warning. There is no sign that says, "Pay attention, this is the one. This is the night that rewrites everything." It arrives the way that Tuesday arrived for Naomi Bennett. Tired, cold, 11-hour shift done. Granola bar in her coat pocket. Feet aching from hours on linoleum floors. Just a woman on a train trying to get home. It arrives as a boy sitting too still. It arrives as 2 men watching him with the quiet patience of people who have done this before. And before that, and before that. It arrives as a phone hitting the floor of a subway car, a call connecting by accident or by miracle or by the particular stubbornness of the universe when it has decided a story needs to move, and a voice coming through that speaker that turned 2 dangerous men into 2 frightened ones in under 3 seconds. Naomi Bennett was 34 years old. She was a trauma-informed social worker who had given 11 years of her life to children the system had failed. She was warm, but she was not soft. She had been hurt before, badly, by a man she had confused intensity with love for, and she had paid for that confusion in ways she was still quietly tallying. She had built herself back. She was careful now. She knew her patterns. She saw herself walking toward this one with her eyes wide open. She stayed anyway. Because there was a boy on that platform who had been sitting too still for too long. And a man who had crossed a city in the middle of the night to crouch down to a child's eye level before he did anything else, before he spoke, before he threatened, before he did a single thing the city expected of a man like him, and check whether those small hands had been hurt. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. And what Naomi did not know yet, what none of them knew standing on that cold platform with the city pressing in around them, was that the boy in the middle of all of this had seen something 7 years ago that powerful and dangerous people had spent every day since trying to make sure he never remembered. And they were running out of patience. The subway that Tuesday night was not a coincidence. It was not random. It was the beginning of something that had been planned, and timed, and set into motion by people who had done their homework, and who had decided that the time for patience was over. Naomi Bennett had just stepped into the middle of it. And the only question now, the question that was going to follow every single one of them through every chapter of this story, was whether love and courage and the stubborn refusal to look away from a child in danger was going to be enough, or whether the darkness that had been building for 7 years was simply too large for any of that to survive. This is the story of what happened next. Stay with it, because it is going to break your heart before it heals it. And it is going to be worth every single second. Naomi Bennett was 34 years old, and she had seen enough broken things in her life to recognize when something was about to shatter. She was a trauma-informed social worker. Had been for 11 years. She spent her days inside courtrooms, group homes, and crisis centers, pulling children out of systems that were supposed to protect them but often didn't. She had held kids who hadn't eaten in 3 days. She had filled out paperwork while a child screamed in the next room. She had driven home at midnight more times than she could count, sitting in her parked car for 10 minutes before she could make herself go inside, because the weight of the day needed somewhere to go before she carried it through her own front door. Naomi was not soft. People who mistook her warmth for softness learned quickly that they were wrong. But she was good. Deeply, stubbornly good. Even when goodness cost her things she couldn't get back. She had been burned before. A man named Derek, 2 years earlier, had taken 3 years of her life and left her with a very specific lesson. Intensity is not the same thing as love. She had confused the two. She had tried to fix him, and he had let her try until he was done letting her. That wound was still there. Not open anymore, but not gone either. More like a scar she checked sometimes, just to remind herself what it felt like to ignore her own warnings. That night, Naomi was on the late train home. It was a Tuesday. Her feet hurt. She had a half-eaten granola bar in her coat pocket and a case file sitting in her brain that she couldn't turn off no matter how hard she tried. The subway car was mostly empty. Fluorescent lights. The smell of old metal and cold air. A few scattered riders, a woman with grocery bags, a man asleep against the window, a teenager with headphones that leaked sound. And then, in the seat closest to the far door, a boy. Korean. Maybe 10 years old. Small for his age. He was sitting completely still. Not the stillness of a tired child or a bored one. This was a different kind of stillness. The kind Naomi had seen before, in children who had learned very early that moving too much, breathing too loud, taking up too much space was dangerous. His hands were folded in his lap like he had placed them there carefully and told them not to move. His eyes were fixed on 2 men seated across the aisle. The men were not looking at their phones. They were looking at him. Naomi had been a social worker long enough to know what that specific dynamic looked like. Adults watching a child with too much focus, too much patience. Like they were waiting for something. Like they had done this before. One of them was heavy-set, in a dark jacket, fingers tapping slow against his knee. The other was leaning slightly forward, elbows on thighs, eyes tracking the boy the way you track something you don't want to lose. The boy had not moved once. Naomi stood up from her seat without fully deciding to. She crossed the car and sat down beside him. Just sat. No announcement. No big gesture. She pulled out her phone like she was checking something and said, without looking at him, "What stop you getting off at?" The boy blinked. Just once. 42nd, he said quietly. Me too, she said. That was a lie. Her stop was 47th. But he didn't need to know that, and she wasn't going anywhere. She could feel the 2 men recalibrating. One of them shifted in his seat. The other one's jaw moved slightly, like he was deciding something. Naomi kept her eyes on her phone screen and her full attention on every micro-movement in that car. She had done crisis intervention for over a decade. She knew how to look calm while she was running threat assessments in real time. The train lurched. The lights flickered once. Then the heavy-set man stood up. He crossed the aisle in 2 steps, and before Naomi could process it, he had grabbed the boy's left arm, not roughly, which somehow made it worse, because it meant he had done this before, meant he knew the exact amount of force that would move a child without making him scream, and he said quietly, almost gently, "Come on. Let's go." The boy made no sound. His face went somewhere far away. And Naomi stood up. She placed herself between the man and the door. She was 5'6". She was not large. She was carrying a granola bar and a work tote. But she looked that man in the eyes and she said, clearly, without flinching, "Take your hand off that child right now." For 2 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the man looked at her the way people look at an obstacle they haven't accounted for. The second man rose from his seat. The boy's arm was still being held. And in the small chaos of Naomi shifting her weight forward and the man reaching toward her with his free hand, the boy's phone slid from his jacket pocket and clattered to the floor. It hit the ground face up. The screen lit. A call connected. Nobody had dialed anything. The impact had hit a contact, or maybe the boy had triggered it on purpose, maybe his small fingers had found the right name in the fall, maybe it was the kind of thing that happens when the universe decides a story needs to move, but the call connected, and a voice came through the speaker. Not panicked. Not frantic. Not the voice of a worried parent who had been pacing the living room. It was low. It was calm. It was the kind of calm that is not the absence of danger but the presence of total control. One word. Son. The heavy-set man let go of the boy's arm. The second man took one step back. Both of them looked down at the phone on the floor, and whatever they saw, whatever name was on that screen, changed their faces. It was not fear exactly. It was the specific look of men who have just realized they have made a catastrophic miscalculation. The boy picked up the phone. He held it to his ear. He said something in Korean, very quietly, very fast. 3 sentences. Maybe 4. The voice on the other end said 2 words Naomi couldn't understand. Then the boy looked at the 2 men and said, in perfect English, calm as a stone, "You should go." Neither man moved for 3 full seconds. Then they walked to the opposite end of the car. The train pulled into the station. The doors opened. The men exited without looking back. And within 4 minutes, Naomi counted, 3 black SUVs were visible through the station windows, idling at the curb. Men in dark clothing stepped out, positioned themselves. Still. She stood on the platform with the boy beside her, the granola bar still in her pocket, her heart going hard and fast against her ribs, and she thought, I should leave. I should get on the next train and go home and file this away as the strangest Tuesday of my life. She did not leave. The boy stood beside her without speaking. He had refolded his hands, the same careful way as before. But he kept glancing at the entrance to the station. Not scared. Waiting. A man appeared at the top of the stairs. He was tall. Korean. Maybe early 40s. He was wearing a dark coat that fit him precisely, like it had been made for him, and he moved through the station with the quiet, unhurried certainty of someone who has never once had to wonder whether people would make room for him. They did. Without knowing why, the 3 other people on the platform shifted slightly, gave him space, looked away. He walked directly to the boy. He did not look at Naomi first. He did not scan the platform for threats. The first thing he did, the very first thing, was crouch down to the boy's height. He took the boy's hands in both of his, turned them over, examined the wrists. He checked his face. He placed one hand briefly against the side of the boy's neck, checking. Then quietly in English, "Did they hurt you?" The boy shook his head. The man exhaled. It was barely visible, but it was there. Only then did he stand. Only then did he turn and look at Naomi. His eyes were dark and very direct. Not hostile. Not grateful. Measuring. Like he was reading something printed in small text. Naomi looked back at him and did not look away, because she had spent 11 years learning not to let dangerous things know they frightened her. He said, "You stayed with him." She said, "Yes." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Thank you." The boy reached up and took the man's hand. Not grabbed, took. The easy, habitual gesture of a child who has done this 1,000 times. And the man's grip closed around those small fingers, and something shifted in his face, so briefly, so controlled, that if Naomi had blinked she would have missed it. But she didn't blink. She had spent 11 years learning to see the things people tried not to show. The man reached into his coat and held out a card. Plain white. One phone number. No name. Naomi took it without knowing why. He led the boy toward the exit. And she stood there on the platform watching them go, with 3 black SUVs waiting outside and the faint sound of the city pressing in, and she thought about the 2 men from the subway, the way they had gone pale, the way they had moved back so fast. And she thought about something else. Something she couldn't stop hearing. Just before the heavier man had been pulled away by the men in dark coats, he had turned and looked at the boy. Not with aggression. Not with anger. With something else entirely. With recognition. With a look that said, "I know what you saw. I know what you remember." And the boy had looked back at him the same way. Like they shared a secret Naomi didn't have the context to understand yet. She looked down at the card in her hand. 1 phone number. No name. She should throw it away. Every rational part of her brain was telling her to throw it away. Go home, lock her door, make tea, forget the shape of that man's face and the way the boy had folded his hands like he had been trained to take up as little space as possible. She put the card in her pocket. She was going to regret this. She already knew that. But she was also standing in a subway station at 11:15 at night, having just watched the most feared man in the city show up for a child like a human shield. And the first thing he had done, before anything else, was check the boy's wrists. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. If you're wondering whether Naomi had any idea what she was walking into, she didn't. But here's the thing about people who spend their lives protecting children. They don't always get to choose when the story finds them. Sometimes the story sits down beside you on a subway car at 11 at night, and you have to decide in real time who you're going to be. She had decided. But what she didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that the boy in the subway had seen something years ago that powerful, dangerous people had spent 7 years trying to bury. And tonight had not been an accident. Tonight had been a test. And the test was not over. Stay with us. Because what happens next will completely change everything you think you know about this story. The man's name was Park Jun Wu. Naomi did not learn that on the platform. She learned it 3 days later, sitting at a corner table in a coffee shop on West 44th, watching a 10-year-old boy do multiplication problems in a spiral notebook while the most feared Korean crime boss in the city drank black coffee he never once touched. But we'll get to that. Right now, let's stay in the station. Because something happened on that platform that nobody reported, nobody filmed, and nobody discussed afterward. But it mattered more than any of the black SUVs or the men in dark coats or the controlled calm in Jun Wu's voice when he said thank you like it was a word he had to consciously retrieve. What happened was this. As Jun Wu turned toward the exit with Leo beside him, one of his men, a broad-shouldered man with a flat expression who had arrived with the cars, leaned down and said something in Korean, very quickly, very close to Jun Wu's ear. Jun Wu's steps didn't slow. His face didn't change. But his free hand, the one not holding Leo's, closed into a fist at his side. Then opened again. And Naomi, who had been watching because she couldn't stop watching, filed that away in the part of her brain that stored the things she couldn't explain yet. She went home. She made tea she didn't drink. She sat at her kitchen table with the white card in front of her and the case file she couldn't turn off still cycling through her head, and she thought about the boy's face. Not the fear. She had expected fear. What she hadn't expected was the composure. The practiced, deliberate composure of a child who has learned to manage his own reactions because no one else was managing them for him. She knew that look. She had pulled 12 children in the past year alone out of situations that had given them that exact look. That look was what happened when a child had been left alone with something too large for a child to carry, and had carried it anyway, because there was no one else. She put the card in her dresser drawer. She told herself she would not call it. She called it on the 3rd day. Not because she had convinced herself it was safe. Because she had spent 72 hours thinking about a boy who memorized subway exits the way other kids memorized baseball stats, and she could not leave that alone. The phone rang twice. Jun Wu's voice, when it answered, was exactly as she remembered. Low. Controlled. Like a man who had been interrupted but would not say so. She told him who she was. He said he knew. She asked if she could meet with him. There was a pause, not uncertain, more like he was deciding something, and then he said yes, and gave her the name of a coffee shop, and a time. She arrived first. She sat with her back to the wall, which was habit. They arrived together, Leo and Jun Wu. And the first thing that registered was that Leo was wearing a backpack covered in small iron-on patches of subway lines. Not cartoon characters. Not superheroes. Subway maps. The city's transit routes stitched onto blue canvas like a geography lesson he was carrying on his back. He dropped into the chair across from Naomi without ceremony and opened his notebook. Jun Wu sat. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at her. She looked back. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Leo's pencil scratched across the notebook. Somewhere behind them, someone's coffee order was called out. Then Jun Wu said, "You're wondering who he is." "I'm wondering who both of you are," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. More like recalibration. He told her. Not everything. She understood, even then, that she was getting a curated version, but enough. Leo had been found during the dismantling of a trafficking network 7 years prior. He had been 3 years old. There had been no documentation of his existence, no record of a legal guardian, no one to hand him to through official channels without risking his safety. Jun Wu had remained with him through the night while contacts were made. By morning, leaving had become something he could not do. The legal adoption had taken 18 months. He had waited every one of those months. He said it without sentiment. Factually. The way you describe a thing that happened. And Naomi, who was trained to listen to the space between what people said and what they meant, heard in that flat delivery something that was not flat at all. She heard a man describing the one decision in his life he had made without calculation, without strategy, without knowing the outcome, and who would make it the same way again every single time. She said, "What happens to him if something happens to you?" Jun Wu looked at her steadily. "Nothing will happen to me." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It isn't." Leo looked up from his notebook at that moment. He studied them both. Not with the anxiety of a child monitoring adult conflict, but with the clear, evaluating attention of someone taking stock of something. Then he looked directly at Naomi and said, with complete seriousness, "Do you know what my dad does?" The table went still. Jun Wu did not move. Naomi met the boy's eyes. "Not really," she said. Leo held her gaze for one more second. Then, "Good." And he went back to his multiplication. The word landed in the middle of the table like a stone dropped into water. Naomi felt the ripple of it. It was a child's joke, deadpan, a little theatrical, but it was also not a joke. There was something layered in it. Something that said, "I am aware of more than you think I am." Something that said, "I have constructed a story about my father that helps me live inside this life, and I am protecting that story, and I need you to understand that I know I am protecting it." That was not a 10-year-old's game. That was a 10-year-old's survival strategy. Naomi picked up her coffee cup, set it down without drinking, looked at Jun Wu. He was looking at Leo. The expression on his face, she had no simple word for it. It was pride, but not the swelling kind. It was the more painful kind. The kind that comes with the awareness of everything you cannot give someone you love, no matter how much you have. He caught her looking. His face closed again. Smooth, controlled. She thought, this man has spent so long building walls that he has forgotten what they were originally built to keep out. She thought, this is the point where I should step back. She didn't step back. They talked for another 40 minutes. Leo finished his homework, ate half a blueberry muffin, and spent the last 10 minutes reading a laminated subway map he pulled from his backpack like someone pulling out a favorite book. Jun Wu answered Naomi's questions precisely, some of them too precisely, which told her he had rehearsed versions of these answers and she was getting the rehearsed version. She noted the evasions. She noted the things he chose not to say. And she noted the moment when Leo, without looking up, reached across the table and corrected a number in Jun Wu's coffee cup calculation. They had been working out a tip, and Jun Wu looked down at the boy's handwriting in the margin of a paper napkin and the corner of his mouth moved, fractionally, into something that was almost a smile. Almost. When they stood to leave, Jun Wu said, If you need anything. Naomi said, I'll be in touch. He nodded once. She watched them walk out, Leo adjusting his backpack straps, Jun Wu's hand dropping briefly to the boy's shoulder as they reached the door. She sat back down. She took out her phone. And then she stopped. Because something was turning over in the back of her mind. Something she hadn't let herself look at directly until right now. When that man on the subway platform had been dragged away. The one who had grabbed Leo's arm. Before Jun Wu's men had taken him out of the station, he had looked back at Leo. Not with hatred. Not with the flat, professional blankness of someone running an operation. With recognition. Like he knew the boy. Not from the subway. From before. And the man had said something, low enough that Naomi had barely caught it. He remembers us. She put her phone down on the table. He remembers us. Leo was 3 years old when he was found. He should not have clear memories from that time. He should not remember faces from 7 years ago. That was not how childhood memory worked. Unless something had happened to him that had made those faces unforgettable. Unless those men had reason to believe that somewhere in that boy's mind, there were things buried so deeply that even Leo didn't know they were there. And unless somebody, somewhere, was very, very afraid of what Leo might one day remember. If you think you understand this story yet, stay with it. Because the truth about what Leo saw, what he carries, and what it will eventually cost everyone around him is only beginning to surface. Don't go anywhere. Here is something most people don't understand about traumatized children. They don't always look traumatized. That's the part that trips people up. They look like Leo. They look like a kid who makes dry jokes at coffee tables and eats half a muffin and carries subway maps in his backpack like they are the most normal thing in the world to carry. They look organized, contained, sometimes even light-hearted in small, careful ways. Because they learned early that the people around them responded better to the contained version. So they built that version, and they kept building it, and eventually the container became so precise and well-constructed that even they sometimes forgot what was inside it. Naomi had been trained to see through that. She saw through it with other people's children every day. It was different, unsettling in a way she did not fully examine right away, that she was seeing it in Leo, who was not her case, not her client, not her professional responsibility. She was seeing it because she could not stop thinking about him. And that itself was information. She called the number again 6 days after the coffee shop. She did not fully plan what she was going to say. She only knew that a specific image had been sitting in her brain since the subway platform. Leo's hands, folded in his lap, placed there deliberately, the way you set something fragile on a shelf. And she needed to understand it. Jun Wu answered on the second ring. She said she wanted to spend some time with Leo, not formally, not as a professional assessment, just an afternoon. She said she would understand if the answer was no. There was a pause. Then, he would like that. He told me this morning he wanted to show someone his train books. She almost smiled. He told you that this morning. He is very direct, Jun Wu said. A beat. I think he liked you. She arrived at a building on the Upper West Side the following Saturday afternoon. Jun Wu buzzed her up without a word through the intercom. The apartment was on the 11th floor. The door was opened not by Jun Wu but by Leo himself, who had apparently been waiting, because he opened it before she finished knocking and said, with great seriousness, I have 7 of them. 7 of what? She said. Train books. He stepped back to let her in. The apartment was not what she expected. It was clean, spare, not cold. There were books everywhere, stacked in ways that suggested they were actually read rather than displayed. A kitchen that smelled faintly of sesame and something sweet. 2 large windows overlooking the street. And on one entire wall of Leo's bedroom, which she could see through the open door, a massive hand-drawn map of the city's subway system. Every line, every stop, color-coded, with small handwritten notes at certain junctions that she couldn't read from the doorway but suspected were exit strategies. Jun Wu appeared from the kitchen. He handed her tea without asking if she wanted it. He poured a glass of juice for Leo, who had already pulled 2 books from a shelf and was setting them on the coffee table with the energy of someone about to give a very important presentation. Jun Wu sat in the chair across from the couch. He didn't hover. He didn't leave. He picked up a document from the side table and appeared to read it, but Naomi noticed he didn't turn a single page for the next hour. Leo sat beside her on the couch and opened the first book. He had memorized, as far as Naomi could tell, every active subway line in the city, all 27 routes. He could name every station, the average time between stations, which exits opened onto which streets, which platforms had restricted access, which lines shared tracks. He told her which stations had the most exits and why that mattered. He told her which platforms he found calming and which ones he did not like because you couldn't see the stairs from the bench. He said it all with enthusiasm and precision, like he was sharing something wonderful. And he was. But Naomi was also hearing the architecture underneath it. Every single thing Leo had memorized was about knowing how to leave. She said gently, keeping her voice light, "You like knowing all the ways out." Leo looked at her. Not defensive. Thoughtful. "I like knowing where I am," he said. "If you know where you are, you know how to get somewhere else." Naomi absorbed that. "That's a good way to think about it," she said. "My dad taught me," Leo said. Then he paused and glanced toward the chair where Jun Wu was sitting with his unturned document. "Well, he taught me to always know where the exits are. I turned it into a hobby." From behind the document, quietly, "It's a very thorough hobby." Leo looked pleased. He turned another page. They spent 2 hours like this. Leo showed her the routes he liked best and the ones he trusted least. He showed her a notebook where he had drawn alternate routes between his school and the apartment, color-coded by time of day. He showed her, matter-of-factly, a small card in the front pocket of his backpack with 3 phone numbers on it. Jun Wu's, a man named Marcus, and a woman named Dr. Chen. "Emergency contacts," he said. "That's smart," she said. "I made it myself," he said. "Dad has a system. I made my own system." After Leo had retreated to his room to get the 7th book, Naomi turned to Jun Wu. He met her eyes. He had put the document down. She said quietly, "He's been building escape routes since the beginning." Jun Wu said nothing. She said, "Not because he thinks something will happen, but because knowing they exist is the only thing that makes him feel like he can breathe." A long silence. Then Jun Wu said, "I know. Does he talk to anyone? A professional?" "He did. For 3 years. He stopped asking to go. I didn't want to force it." A pause. "Maybe that was wrong. It might be worth revisiting," she said. "Not accusatory. Just honest." He nodded once. Leo came back with the 7th book, which was twice as large as the others and appeared to include transit maps from 8 other cities. He opened it to Chicago and said very seriously, "The red line is a problem, and I'll tell you why." Naomi laughed. Actually laughed. And Leo's face lit up in a way that was so sudden and unguarded that it caught her off guard, because it was the face of a child who was not performing, not managing, not containing. Just happy that someone was listening. That face stayed with her. Later, when Leo had gone to bed and Naomi was putting on her coat to leave, Jun Wu said, quietly, from the kitchen doorway, "He hasn't shown those books to anyone before." She paused. "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment. "I think because he wasn't sure they would understand what they were really about." She buttoned her coat. "He was right to be careful," she said. "But he was also right to share them." She left. She went home and sat at her kitchen table and thought about a boy who had turned survival into a hobby and called it enthusiasm and made it beautiful and still, underneath all of it, was waiting, without knowing he was waiting, for the day someone would sit beside him on a subway platform and not leave. She also thought about something Leo had said, quietly, near the end of the afternoon, while flipping through the Chicago routes. He had not looked up when he said it. He had kept his eyes on the page. "Do you think bad men can be good dads?" She had not answered him directly. She had said, "I think people are complicated. I think some people do hard things for real reasons. And I think what matters most is what somebody chooses when they have the chance to choose differently." Leo had nodded slowly, like he was filing that away. "That's what I figured," he said. "I just wanted to see what you'd say." She had thought he was asking about his father. She had assumed that, naturally. But sitting now at her kitchen table, she turned that question over again. And she wondered, for the first time, not the last, whether Leo had been asking about someone else entirely. Whether somewhere in those memorized subway maps and color-coded exit routes, there was a memory he couldn't fully name but couldn't fully lose either. A face. A voice. Something that had happened in a place where he had no language to describe it. Something he had seen. Something dangerous people were afraid he might remember. The thought arrived cold and certain, the way true things do. And 2 floors above the coffee cup where she had left her second untouched mug of tea that week, in a spare apartment on the Upper West Side, a boy slept with his nightlight on and his hand curled loosely around the strap of his backpack as though, even in sleep, he needed to know where the exits were. What Leo had seen 7 years ago was not buried as deep as anyone hoped. And the people who wanted it to stay buried were not going to stop at one test. The subway had been step 1. What was coming next was something no subway map could prepare any of them for. Keep watching. Because in the next part, Naomi starts asking questions she was never supposed to ask. And the answers are going to cost her more than she is ready to pay. There is a particular kind of professional who learns, over years, to build a wall between what they know and what they feel. It is not a callous thing. It is a necessary thing. Naomi had that wall. She had built it carefully, brick by brick, across 11 years of case files and court dates and children who looked at her like she was the last solid thing in a room that was collapsing. She was proud of that wall. She was also, she knew, beginning to dismantle it for a boy she had met on a subway platform 9 days ago. That was a problem. And Naomi was nothing if not honest with herself about problems. She sat at her desk on a Wednesday morning, the office quiet around her, her colleagues not yet in, the overhead lights still on their early half setting, the coffee in her mug still hot, and she opened the database she used for longitudinal case tracking. She told herself she was doing routine work. She told herself she had a professional reason to be looking. She searched a keyword. Then another. Then a combination of terms she had learned, obliquely, from what Jun Wu had told her in the coffee shop. Trafficking network. Northeast corridor. 7 years prior. Children without documentation. 3 files came up. She read them. 2 of the 3 children had entered the foster care system through emergency placements in the same 6-month window. Both had presented the same cluster of behavioral indicators: selective mutism, compulsive spatial monitoring, hypervigilance to adult movement, excessive self-regulation under stress. Both had been assessed by different clinicians, and both clinicians had noted, in the files, a phrase that appeared verbatim: history unclear. The child demonstrates knowledge of events inconsistent with the stated developmental stage. In other words, this child knows things a child this age should not know. The 3rd file was sealed. Naomi leaned back in her chair. She sat with what she had found for a long moment. Then she did something she almost never did. She printed the 2 open files, folded them, and put them in her bag. She would cross-reference them at home, away from the system's access log. Because here was the thing about the database. Every search left a record. Every name pulled, every file opened, every keyword run, logged by timestamp and user ID. Which meant that whatever she was beginning to understand about Jun Wu's network, about the children who had moved through it, about the specific shape of what had happened 7 years ago, if someone was watching the system, they would know she was looking. She closed the database. She drank her coffee. Her phone buzzed. A text from a colleague named Priya, who had been in the department for 15 years and knew where most of the institutional bodies were buried. The text said only, "My office when you get a chance." Naomi went to Priya's office. Priya closed the door. She sat down across from Naomi and looked at her with the specific expression of someone who was choosing words carefully. Then she said, "You ran a search this morning." Naomi said, "I run searches every morning." "Not that combination," Priya said. She folded her hands on her desk. "Naomi, I've known you for 6 years. I'm not asking you what you found. I'm asking you whether you understand what you might be getting close to." Naomi looked at her. "I understand the basic shape of it." "I don't think you do." Priya was quiet for a moment. That network, the one that was dismantled 7 years ago, it wasn't fully dismantled. Parts of it went dark. Parts of it have been rebuilding. We know this because 3 children in the past 18 months have come through the system with the same profile markers as the 2017 cohort. Someone is still running operations. And they are very careful and very connected. And the last caseworker who filed a formal report connecting those markers to the original network was removed from her position inside of 2 weeks. Silence. Naomi said carefully. Removed how? Conflict of interest finding. Vague. Enough to pull her clearances. Priya looked at her steadily. She was not wrong about what she found. She was just visible. Naomi absorbed this. She thought about the sealed file. She thought about Leo's hands folded in his lap. She thought about the man on the platform who had said he remembers us. She said, "What would you do?" Priya said, "I would be very careful about where my name appeared. And I would think hard about whether this was a situation I could be useful in, or whether it was a situation that would use me up." She said it kindly. That was the thing about Priya. She was direct without being cruel. Naomi thanked her. She went back to her desk. She sat for a while doing other work, real work, a home visit report, a school placement recommendation, the ordinary labor of her ordinary professional day. And in the back of her mind, turning over and over like a stone in a current, was something she had not let herself look at head on yet. Derek. She had spent 3 years with Derek. She had convinced herself she was in love with him when what she was actually in love with was the project of him. The possibility of him. The version of him that existed in the moments when he almost chose differently. She had been in love with his potential, and she had confused that with him. And by the time she understood the difference it had cost her things she was still tallying. She had a pattern. She helped people who did not fully want to be helped, and she stayed too long, and she called it love. She knew the pattern. She could feel it activating right now. Not for Jun Wu, not exactly, not yet, but for the situation. For the pull of it. For the part of her that had always been most alive when there was a broken thing to put her hands on. The difference was that she was awake to it this time. She could see it clearly. She was watching herself walk towards something she recognized as potentially catastrophic, and she was not stopping. That was not the same as being reckless. That was a choice. A deliberate, eyes-open choice made by a woman who understood the difference between compulsion and decision. She decided. She called the number on the white card. Jun Wu answered. She said, "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly." A pause. "All right," she said. "The men on the subway. The network they're connected to. Is it over?" Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "No." One word. The same weight as the first time she'd heard his voice on the phone on the subway floor. She said, "Is Leo in ongoing danger?" He said, "I am managing it." "That is not what I asked." Silence. Then, quietly, and she understood from the way he said it that he did not say things like this easily. "Yes. He is in ongoing danger. As long as certain people believe he carries certain memories, he will remain a target. I have been managing this for 7 years." A pause. "I intend to continue managing it." Naomi closed her eyes for 1 second. She said, "You need to tell me what you know." She expected resistance. She expected the controlled recalibration, the diplomatic non-answer, the version he had prepared for questions like this. She did not expect what she got. He said, "Can you come here? Tonight?" She said yes. She hung up. She finished her work. She filed her reports. She left at 6, which was early for her. She went home, changed, made herself eat something, and sat for 20 minutes doing nothing, which was her way of checking in with herself. The specific practice of sitting still and asking, "Is this you, or is this the pattern?" She sat with the question honestly. And what came back was not the heat of compulsion or the familiar spiral of someone attaching to damage. What came back was simpler and harder, a boy who memorized subway exits, and a father who had learned to crouch down to a child's height before he did anything else, and 2 men on a platform who had gone pale at the sound of one word, and a sealed file in a database she could not stop thinking about. This was not about fixing anyone. This was about a child who was not safe. And Naomi had never, in 11 years, been able to walk away from a child who was not safe. That was not a flaw. That was the thing that made her who she was. She picked up her keys. She did not know, yet, that by the time she arrived at that apartment that night, something would have already happened to change the geometry of everything. That Jun Wu would answer the door with a stillness in his face that was different from his usual control, and that on his laptop screen, visible from the doorway, was a surveillance photograph of a small woman leaving a laundromat on the Lower East Side. A woman he recognized. A woman he had not seen in 7 years. A woman whose existence changed every assumption anyone in that apartment had been operating on. She did not know that yet. But she was about to find out. If you think you understand the full shape of this story, wait. Because the woman in that photograph is not a villain. She is not a threat. She is something far more complicated and far more heartbreaking than either of those things. And what she wants is going to force every single person in this story to ask themselves one question they have been avoiding. Stay with us. Naomi arrived at the apartment at 7:15. The door opened before she knocked. Jun Wu stepped back to let her in. He was wearing a gray shirt, sleeves pushed up, and his face had that particular set to it. Not tense, something beyond tension, the look of a man who has already done the math on a situation and does not like the answer. Leo was not in the living room. She could hear, faintly, the sound of a tablet playing something from behind the closed bedroom door. Train sounds, maybe. Jun Wu gestured to the table. She sat. He sat across from her. Between them, a laptop, open. On the screen, a photograph. A woman, maybe late 20s, exiting a building. Small, dark-haired, wearing a jacket that was slightly too large. The photograph had been taken from a distance, through what she guessed was a car window, and the timestamp in the corner said it was from 2 days ago. Naomi looked at it. Then she looked at Jun Wu. "Who is she?" she said. He said, "Her name is Park Soon-hee. She was a victim in the original trafficking case." He paused. One of the women who was brought through the network involuntarily. Another pause. She is the reason Leo was there. The sentence landed like a door closing. Naomi said very carefully, "You mean she is his biological mother?" Jun Wu said, "Yes." The room was very quiet. Somewhere behind the closed door, the train sounds continued, soft and rhythmic. She said, "You've known this for how long?" "I confirmed it tonight," he said. "I had a suspicion before. I confirmed it tonight." She looked at the photograph again. The woman's posture, shoulders slightly drawn in, head angled down, moving fast and quiet in the way people moved when they had learned that occupying space attracted attention. Naomi recognized it. She saw it in the children she worked with. She saw it in adults who had been through things that made smallness feel like safety. "She's been making inquiries," Jun Wu said. "Underground. Not law enforcement. Through informal networks. People who help locate missing persons outside the official system. She has been asking about a boy matching Leo's description for the past several months." "She's been looking for him," Naomi said. "Yes. For months. Possibly longer. The inquiries I can trace go back 8 months. Before that, I don't know." Naomi sat with that. 8 months. A woman running unofficial searches for a boy she had lost, or had taken from her. 8 months of quiet, careful searching through channels that wouldn't flag her location to anyone with authority, because she was afraid of authority, because authority had failed her before. She said, "What do you know about what happened to her?" "After." Jun Wu's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, barely. "She was supposed to be resettled. There was a program, informal, not government, that placed survivors in new locations with new documentation. She completed intake. And then she disappeared from the record." "Disappeared how?" "I don't know. I've been trying to find out." He looked at the screen. "What I know is that she is currently living in a single-room apartment in the Lower East Side. She works at a laundromat on Allen Street. She has not contacted any law enforcement. She has not attempted to make any direct contact with Leo." He paused. "She has been very careful." Naomi said, "She's afraid." "Yes." "Of you." A silence. Then, with something that was almost the texture of honesty, Possibly. Among other things. Naomi looked at him directly. Jun Wu. When you found Leo, when you found out who he was and where he had come from, did you ever try to find her? The question sat in the air between them. He did not answer immediately. When he did, he said, the network had taken her. I did not know whether she was alive. I did not know whether she had consented to. He stopped. Started again. In the early period, I could not verify her circumstances. And then time passed and Leo was settled and I... Another stop. No. I should have tried harder. It was perhaps the most honest thing she had heard him say. She did not reward it or punish it. She only nodded, once, and looked back at the photograph. So, she said, what are you going to do? I don't know, he said. Which is when she understood that this was why she was here. Not because he needed legal advice or strategic planning. Because he had reached the edge of the thing he had spent 7 years managing by himself, and he had found someone he trusted enough, barely, tentatively, to bring into the room where he didn't know the answer. She thought about what that cost a man like him. She thought it cost a great deal. She said, tell me everything. From the beginning. He told her. It took 2 hours. What Naomi learned, sitting at that table while the train sounds played softly behind the closed door and the city moved outside the windows, was the shape of an empire built entirely from one original wound. Jun Wu had been 34 when he first encountered the network. He had not been in law enforcement. He had not been a humanitarian worker. He had been a businessman with a specific set of contacts developed over years of operating in the gray zones between legitimate trade and the informal economies that surrounded it. He had stumbled into the network through a financial irregularity. Money moving through a company he was auditing on behalf of a client, money that turned out to be washing through a transit operation that moved children. He had gone to the authorities. He had been told to drop it. He had not dropped it. What he built instead, the network, the contacts, the infrastructure of surveillance and intervention and controlled violence, was constructed piecemeal over 8 years. He had started alone. He had recruited carefully, one person at a time, individuals who had their own wounds, their own reasons. He had funded it through businesses that were genuinely legitimate and others that were not. He had learned quickly that working within the law was possible in about 40% of situations, and in the other 60, waiting for the law to act was not an option any child could afford. Were you judge and jury? Naomi said. It was not quite an accusation. It was an honest question. Yes, he said. I made that choice. I made it knowing what it was. People were hurt. People were hurt, he said. People who were trafficking children. I do not apologize for that. I'm not asking you to apologize, she said. I'm asking you to look at what you built and tell me honestly whether you still believe it is the only way. He was quiet. Then, I believe it was the only way I could have done it then. With what I knew then. With the resources I had then. He looked at the table. I am less certain now. She said, what changed? He looked toward Leo's door. She understood. The empire had been built in the abstract, originally. Built on the idea of children who needed protecting, children who became Leo, a name, a face, a specific weight in the crook of one arm at 3 a.m. when a boy couldn't sleep and didn't want to say so. The empire had been built on principle. And then a child had taken his hand and turned it into something personal, and the moment it became personal, the math changed. Because what you will do in the name of justice is one number. What you will do in the name of your son is a different number. And Jun Wu had been operating on both numbers for 7 years and had never been forced, until now, to examine the space between them. Naomi said, one of your men was paid to give information about Leo's location. His face went still. Yes. Who was it? He told her. She said, what happened to him? He looked at her steadily. He did not answer. She understood what that silence meant. She thought about the sealed file. She thought about the caseworker who had been removed. She thought about Priya's voice in the quiet office. I would think hard about whether this was a situation I could be useful in, or whether it was a situation that would use me up. She thought about Derek. She thought about 3 years of choosing a man's potential over his reality. She looked at Jun Wu and said, I need to be clear about something. He looked back at her. I'm not here to fix you, she said. I'm not here to save you from yourself or transform you or convince you to be something different than what you've chosen to be. I'm here because a child on a subway platform was in danger and nobody else was there, and now I know enough that I can't pretend I don't know it. She paused. But I need you to understand that if I am going to be involved in any way at all, with Leo's life or with what happens next, I will not cover for you. I will not pretend violence is not violence. And I will not stay quiet if I believe you are making choices that will destroy what you are trying to protect. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, very quietly, I understand. She nodded. She picked up her coat. She was at the door when she stopped. She turned back. The woman, she said. Soon he. She did not leave him willingly. No, he said. She did not. Then whatever happens next, Naomi said, she is not the enemy. She is a mother. And what she wants has to be part of this. She left. She walked home through cold air, hands in her pockets, the folded printouts from the database still in her bag. She thought about a small woman in a jacket slightly too big for her, opening a kitchen cabinet every morning to look at a photograph of a baby, and doing it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. She thought about what it meant to search for something for years through channels so unofficial, so quiet, so deliberately invisible that nobody would flag your name, because your name on a list was dangerous, because your existence was still something you protected carefully, because you had learned that the world was a place where the wrong person noticing you could end you. She thought about what it meant to keep looking anyway. And she thought about something that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the coffee shop, since Leo's multiplication table and his subway books and the dry joke about not knowing what his dad did. Something she had not let herself ask directly until now. The network that had taken Soon Hee at 19. The one Jun Wu had dismantled. Or partially dismantled. The one Priya had told her was rebuilding. And the man on the subway platform who had said, "He remembers us." Those men had been looking for Leo. They had run a test to see if he could be found, if he was guarded, if he was vulnerable. And the reason they had not simply moved on, had not simply cut their losses and protected their operation from a distance, was Leo's memory. What Leo remembered from 7 years ago was in that building. In those rooms. In whatever he had seen at 3 years old that had been powerful enough to survive in the architecture of a child's mind despite everything that had happened since. And if the network was rebuilding, if new leadership had taken over the infrastructure, then those new leaders had the same reason as the old ones to want Leo's memory buried. Permanently. She stopped on the sidewalk. The SUVs. The men at the station. The coordinated test of Leo's security. The insider who had sold his location. This was not a warning. This was preparation. They were not trying to scare Jun Wu. They were mapping the defenses. They were identifying vulnerabilities. They were getting ready. And Jun Wu, brilliant, controlled, empire-building Jun Wu, who had dismantled networks and moved through shadows for 8 years, was watching the horizon so carefully for the threat he knew that he might not see the one he didn't. She stood on the cold sidewalk and thought, someone needs to tell him. And then she thought, someone already knows. Leo. Leo, who memorized exits not because he was paranoid, but because something in him recognized the geometry of danger before his conscious mind caught up. Leo, who had been watching 2 men on a subway car the way you watched something you already knew was wrong. Leo, who had asked Naomi whether bad men could be good dads in a tone that was not abstract. What if Leo remembered more than anyone knew? What if the network already knew he remembered? What if the subway had not been a test of Jun Wu's defenses? What if it had been a test of Leo's? She started walking again, fast, heart high in her chest, and she thought, we are running out of time. I don't know exactly how much time we have left, but we are running out. The next move in this story will not be subtle. It will not be careful. And it will not give any of them the luxury of making decisions slowly. What is coming for Leo is bigger than anyone has said out loud yet. And it is coming soon. You do not want to miss it. Because when it arrives, nothing will be the same. Here is something nobody prepares you for when you love a child who has been through the kind of thing Leo had been through. You can give them everything. A locked door. A safe building. A bodyguard outside the school. 3 phone numbers on a laminated card in the front pocket of a backpack. You can give them a bedroom with their name on the door and train books stacked to the ceiling, and a father who would burn the world down before he let anything touch them. And none of it, not one single piece of it, can reach the place inside them where the fear actually lives. Jun Wu knew this on some level. He had known it the way you knew things you weren't ready to act on yet. Academically, theoretically, from a careful distance. He had built systems. He had installed security. He had constructed around Leo the most comprehensive architecture of physical protection that money and influence and 8 years of knowing exactly how dangerous the world could produce. What he had not built, what he did not know how to build, was the thing Naomi did on a Saturday afternoon in the living room of that apartment when a car backfired on the street below and Leo dropped behind the couch before he had finished his next breath. But we'll get to that. First, you need to understand what that afternoon looked like before it cracked open. 'Cause that is how these things work. They start ordinary. They start with train books and juice glasses and a boy who is, by any visible measure, completely fine. And then something happens that is so small, a sound, a shadow, a car on a street doing the thing cars do, and in less than a second you are seeing the truth that the ordinary afternoon was always sitting on top of. Naomi had come over on a Saturday 2 weeks after the coffee shop meeting. Not formally. Not with a professional purpose she could name clearly. She told herself she was checking in. She told herself it was a natural follow-up given what she knew and what she was watching develop. Both of those things were true, and neither of them was the whole truth. The whole truth was simpler and harder. She kept thinking about Leo. She kept thinking about a boy who memorized exit routes and called it a hobby and looked lit up from the inside when someone sat down beside him and listened. She brought nothing. She knocked. Leo opened the door. He was wearing a sweatshirt with a subway map printed on it. She was beginning to understand this was less a fashion choice and more a personal philosophy, and he had a pencil tucked behind his ear and the expression of someone who had been in the middle of something important. "I'm calculating transfer times," he said, by way of greeting. "How's that going?" she said. "The L train is a disaster," he said. "Come see." She came in. Jun Wu was in the kitchen. He appeared in the doorway with a dish towel over his shoulder and the slightly self-conscious look of a man who had been caught doing something as ordinary as cooking and was not entirely sure how to hold that. He nodded at her. She nodded back. It was a language they were developing. Small, precise, carrying more than it appeared to. He went back to the kitchen. Leo had set up at the coffee table with 3 books open simultaneously and a notebook filled with calculations that appeared to track the average wait time between connecting trains at major transfer stations across the city. He had color-coded the stations by reliability. Red was bad. Green was good. There was a lot of red. "The problem," Leo said, pulling her down to sit beside him with the matter-of-fact authority of a boy who knew exactly what he was talking about, "is that people plan routes based on the map. But the map doesn't tell you about the gaps. The real gaps. The ones that get you stuck." Naomi looked at the notebook. She said, "So you calculate the gaps." "I calculate the gaps," he said, with great satisfaction. She thought, this child has been calculating gaps since he was old enough to understand that gaps were where danger lived. He just found a way to make it feel like a project instead of a wound. They sat like that for almost an hour. Leo explained his system with the thoroughness of someone who had been waiting for an audience who could keep up. He showed her a route from his school to the apartment that bypassed 3 stations he didn't trust. Not because anything had ever happened there, but because the platform layout made it hard to see the stairs. He showed her alternate routes for different times of day. He showed her which lines ran most reliably after 10 at night. After 10 at night. He was 10 years old. He was building contingency plans for being alone in the city after 10 at night. Not because anyone had told him to. Because something in him had understood, early and permanently, that the time to find the exit was before you needed it. Naomi kept her face even. She kept her voice easy. She asked questions that followed his logic rather than interrupting it, because she understood, professionally, personally, that the worst thing you could do with a child who had built a system to survive was make them feel like the system was wrong. The system was not wrong. The system was the thing keeping them functional. You honored the system while you very gently, very slowly, built something underneath it that didn't require so much maintenance. Jun Wu brought lunch without being asked. Set it on the table. Went back to whatever he had been doing. Did not sit with them. Naomi noticed this, the way he orbited without landing, present without occupying space, careful not to crowd. She did not know yet whether that was respect or distance. She suspected it was both, and that he had not examined the difference. They ate. Leo talked. Outside, the city did what the city did on Saturday afternoons. Traffic, voices, the general low percussion of several million people going about their ordinary lives. And then a car backfired. It was loud. The kind of loud that hits the chest before the ears have finished processing it. A sharp percussive crack that in any other context was just a car, just a mechanical failure, just a thing that happened on city streets a dozen times a day. Leo was gone before the sound finished. Not running. Not screaming. His body just moved. 1 second he was beside her on the couch with a pencil in his hand, and the next second he was behind it. On the floor. Pressed against the back of the couch in the space between the furniture and the wall. His arms were up, slightly, not covering his head, not the dramatic gesture of someone performing fear. Just slightly raised, instinctively, the way arms went when a body had learned that things came from above. The pencil had fallen on the floor. He hadn't noticed. The whole thing took less than 2 seconds. Silence. Then Leo's head came up slowly over the edge of the couch cushion. He looked at Naomi. His face was the particular color of a child who has just been ambushed by their own nervous system in front of someone they were not trying to show this to. A kind of desperate, cornered embarrassment that was worse than the fear itself because the fear was involuntary but the shame felt like a choice. He said very quietly, "It was just a car." "I know," Naomi said. She did not stand up. She did not reach over the couch toward him. She did not do any of the things that would require him to manage her reaction on top of managing his own. She slid off the couch and sat down on the floor. On his side. Not touching him. Just there. At his level. In the same space. She said, "You want to just sit here for a minute?" Leo looked at her. Something moved through his face. The assessment of someone deciding whether a thing was safe. Whether she was going to make this into something. Whether there was a lesson coming. There was no lesson. She reached over and picked up his pencil from the floor and held it out to him. He took it. They sat on the floor behind the couch together and said nothing for a while. The city outside continued its Saturday. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pan moved on the stove. After about 3 minutes, Leo's breathing evened out. After 5, he pulled one of his notebooks off the coffee table above them and opened it in his lap and started writing something, just to have something to do with his hands. Naomi sat beside him and did not make it a moment. Did not name it. Did not file it or fix it or turn it into a lesson about healing and recovery and the non-linear nature of trauma processing, even though she could have, even though every professional instinct she had was generating language for what she was watching. She just stayed. Because sometimes staying was the whole thing. Sometimes the most powerful intervention available to a human being was the refusal to leave. They were still sitting there, Leo now annotating something in his notebook, Naomi reading from her phone with her back against the couch, when she became aware that someone was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. Jun Wu. He had not spoken. He had not come into the room. He was standing in the doorway with the dish towel still over his shoulder and his face doing the thing it did when he was feeling something he had not given himself permission to feel. Going very still, every surface controlled, but something happening underneath that stillness that a careful eye could detect if it knew what to look for. He was looking at the two of them on the floor. He was looking at something he did not know how to give. Naomi understood in that moment, with a clarity that was almost physical, the full shape of what Jun Wu had and had not built for Leo. He had given the boys security cameras and reinforced doors and a driver who knew 7 alternate routes to the school. He had given him books and food and a bedroom with his name on it and a legal document that said in the eyes of every court in this country, "This child is mine and I am his." He had given him everything that could be purchased, planned, or protected. He had never once sat on the floor. Not because he didn't love Leo. He loved Leo with the specific ferocity of a man who had looked at a 3-year-old boy sitting silent in a corner and had understood, without language, without deliberation, that this child was his responsibility in a way that preceded every choice he had ever consciously made. But love without the knowledge of how to be present in the small moments, love expressed only through systems and structures and the removal of external threats, was a particular kind of incomplete. It could hold a child safe. It could not hold a child still. Jun Wu looked at them on the floor for a long moment. Then he looked at Naomi. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The look said everything that needed saying, and she gave it to him without accusation and without softness, just honestly, the way she gave most things. He looked away first. He went back to the kitchen. But she heard the pan go quiet on the stove. And she understood that he was standing in that kitchen not cooking anything, just standing, with a dish towel over his shoulder and the architecture of everything he had built surrounding him and the sudden, uncomfortable awareness that the most important room in the apartment was the one he was not in. Leo eventually got up. He didn't make a production of it. He just stood, brushed his knees off out of habit, picked up his notebook, and sat back on the couch like nothing had happened. Like it was already filed and processed, and he was moving forward. Naomi sat back on the couch beside him. He said, not looking up, "I know it's just a car. I know that. I know you know," she said. "My body doesn't always remember what I know," he said. She said, "That happens to a lot of people. More than you'd think." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Does it happen to you?" She thought about Derek. She thought about the specific way her chest still tightened sometimes in the pause before someone answered a question she had asked vulnerably. She thought about the wall she had built and the disciplined way she maintained it, and the fact that sitting on the floor just now had been the most unguarded she had been in someone else's space in over a year. She said, "Yeah, it happens to me." Leo nodded. Like that was the right answer. Like that was the answer that made the floor slightly more solid under everything. They sat together until the afternoon went gold through the windows. When Naomi left, Jun Wu walked her to the door. He said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, not quite meeting her eyes, "He's never let anyone sit with him before." After. She put on her coat. "He let me," she said simply. She left. She was halfway down the block when her phone buzzed. A message from a number she had recently added to her contacts. Marcus, one of Jun Wu's men, who had been given her number for emergency relay purposes. She opened it. 3 words and a link to a surveillance image. The words were, "We found something." The image was a still from a camera feed. A street corner. A man standing across from a building she recognized immediately. She had just walked past it. She walked past it every time she came here. It was the street across from Leo's school. The man in the photograph was not one of Jun Wu's men. She had learned those faces over the past weeks. This was someone else. Someone standing with a particular stillness of a person who was not waiting for a bus or a friend or anything ordinary. Someone watching. She stared at the photograph for a long moment on the cold sidewalk. Then she looked up. The street around her was ordinary. Saturdays, people, the city going about its business. Nothing out of place. Nothing that would look wrong to anyone who hadn't spent 11 years learning to read the spaces between what was visible and what was real. She put her phone in her pocket and walked faster. Because what the photograph told her was not just that someone was watching the school. What it told her, the detail that made her stomach drop and her pace increase and her hand close tight around her keys, was the angle. The man in the photograph was not watching the front entrance. He was watching the side exit. The one Leo had shown her 3 weeks ago, in his notebook, color-coded green. The one Leo trusted most because you could see the stairs from the platform. The one Leo had identified, without knowing anyone was watching, as his preferred route. Someone had read Leo's map. And if they had read the map, they had been closer to Leo than anyone had known. Close enough to learn his patterns. Close enough to study his system. Close enough to know exactly where he would go if he was afraid. The city pressed in around her and she walked fast and thought, this is not surveillance. This is preparation. And preparation meant a timeline. And a timeline meant they were almost out of time. She pulled out her phone and called the number on the white card. He answered before the first ring finished. She said, "They've been watching the school." They know his routes. A pause. One beat. Two. Then Jun Wu's voice, steady as stone but carrying underneath it something she had not heard from him before. Something that sounded, for just a fraction of a second, like fear. He said, "I know. We have a bigger problem." She stopped walking. "How much bigger?" she said. He said, "Come back." She was already turning around. What Jun Wu was about to show her was going to rewrite everything she thought she understood about the danger Leo was in. The threat was not coming from outside the empire. Part of it had been inside it all along. Stay with the story, do not miss what's coming, because what has been hiding in the dark is about to step into the light. And when it does, nothing in this story will ever look the same again. If this story is hitting you somewhere real, kindly hit the like button and consider subscribing to Afro Korean Tales and Stories. And keep watching, because we are just getting started. There is a specific kind of grief that does not have a ceremony. There is no funeral for it. No casserole delivered to the door. No card signed by people who do not know what to say but want you to know they are thinking of you. The world does not stop or soften or make accommodations for it. You simply carry it, every morning, every night, every ordinary moment in between, and the carrying becomes so familiar that eventually you stop noticing the weight until something shifts and the full mass of it lands on you all at once and takes your breath clean away. Park Soon-hee had been carrying that grief for 7 years. She woke at 5:45 every morning. Not because her shift started early, it started at 8. She woke at 5:45 because the hour before the city got loud was the only hour she allowed herself the full weight of what she carried. She made tea. She stood at the window of her single-room apartment on the Lower East Side and watched the street below go from dark to gray to the first pale suggestion of morning. She did not cry. She had moved past crying years ago, the way you moved past a town you would never drive back through. It was still there, still real, but no longer on the route. Then she opened the kitchen cabinet above the stove. Inside, taped to the inside of the door where no one who came in, the building superintendent, the woman from the second floor who sometimes borrowed cooking oil, any hypothetical inspector who might one day have a reason to look, would see it unless they were specifically looking, was a photograph. A baby. Korean. Round-faced, dark-eyed. Caught in a moment of looking at something off-camera with the specific focused intensity of very small children encountering something new. He was maybe 18 months old in the photograph. Maybe 2. The image was worn at the corners from years of careful handling. She looked at it every morning. She closed the cabinet. She went to work. This was the rhythm of Soon-hee's life. The laundromat on Allen Street where she had worked for 4 years was 3 blocks from her apartment. She walked. She arrived before the owner unlocked the door, stood on the sidewalk in whatever the weather was doing, and waited. She was never late. She had never called in sick. The owner, a woman named Rosa who had stopped asking personal questions after the first year and had settled into a comfortable mutual silence, paid her cash and did not comment on the fact that her employee appeared to have no social life, no visitors, and no phone except a prepaid model she replaced every few months. Soon-hee was not hiding. Not exactly. She was not on any official list or government database. Her documentation was good. Not perfect, but good, the work of people who specialized in the kind of quiet disappearance that survivors sometimes needed. She did not use credit cards. She did not have a lease in her name. She did not exist, officially, in any form that would make her easy to find. This was by design. She had learned, painfully, during a period she did not revisit in detail, that existing officially made you findable. And being findable, for someone who had come through what she had come through, was dangerous. But she had been searching, quietly, through channels that were themselves unofficial, themselves invisible, themselves populated by people who had learned to operate in the negative space of the formal world. People who moved information without creating records. People who knew how to ask questions that did not trigger alerts. She had a name, a physical description, an approximate age. She had no case number, no court record, no official trace. She had a photograph of a baby and 7 years of accumulated conviction and a grief with no ceremony. She had been searching for 8 months through the channels she had access to. In truth, she had been building toward the search for years before that. gathering the courage and the contacts and the specific kind of stubborn refusal to accept the permanent loss of something that the world had decided was simply gone. He was not simply gone. She knew he was not gone. She had known the way you knew things that lived below the level of evidence. In the body, in the place behind the sternum that did not traffic in logic. She had found a thread 3 weeks ago. Not a name. Not a location. A thread. A description passed through 2 contacts of a boy matching a very specific combination of characteristics, living in an arrangement that was not a traditional family, in a city she knew. That thread had led to another thread. And another. And she was careful. God, she was so careful. She had learned the cost of being careless, and she was not going to be careless now. Not when she was this close. Not when the shape of what she was looking for was finally beginning to resolve from blur into outline. She did not know about the subway. She did not know about Naomi. She did not know that 2 weeks ago a woman she had never met had stood up in a subway car and placed herself between a child and 2 men who had been sent to test whether he could be found. She did not know that the boy's father, the man who had taken him, raised him, built an empire around protecting him, had been running surveillance on her for 6 days. She only knew that the photograph in her cabinet was 7 years old, and she was 3 blocks from a laundromat, and she was still breathing, and she was still looking, and she was not going to stop. Now here is what Jun Wu knew that Naomi did not know yet. He had received the intelligence on a Thursday evening, through a contact who ran monitoring on the underground inquiry networks, the informal channels that operated below law enforcement radar, populated by people who had reason to avoid official systems. The contact had flagged a pattern. A woman, using no name, running inquiries through 3 separate informal networks over the course of several months. The inquiries were consistent. The physical description she was providing matched Leo precisely. Not just generically, but with a kind of detail that came from memory rather than report. The shape of the face. The eyes. A birthmark on the left shoulder that was not in any document. The name attached to the inquiries, surfaced through cross-referencing, was Park Soon-hee. Jun Wu had looked at that name for a long time. He had looked at it the way you looked at something you had been half expecting and half dreading for years, with a specific, hollow quality of recognition. He knew this name. He had known it since the beginning, since the night of the raid, since the moment he had pieced together, through records and testimony and the terrible clarity of a 3-year-old boy left alone in a room with no documentation, what had happened and to whom. She had not sold her son. He had known that then. He had known it, and he had set it aside because the immediate problem had been keeping Leo alive, and the question of his origins had been, in that brutal early period, secondary to the question of his survival. He had told himself he would come back to it. He had not come back to it. 7 years. He had run the surveillance himself. He had not delegated it. He had pulled up the feed on his own laptop, late at night after Leo was asleep, and he had watched a small woman leave a laundromat and walk 3 blocks home and enter a building and go up to a 3rd-floor window where, briefly, a light went on. He had watched her emerge the next morning and stand on the sidewalk in the cold waiting for the building to open. He had watched her move through the city with the practiced smallness of someone who had learned to occupy as little space as possible. He had watched her. And he had said nothing. Not to Naomi. Not to Leo. Not to anyone. He had been running surveillance on Soon-hee for 6 days when Naomi called about the photograph of the man outside Leo's school. He had asked her to come back. And when she arrived, coat still on, face tight with the controlled urgency of someone who had just recalculated the danger level and was recalibrating in real time, he had sat her down and opened the laptop and shown her something that he had been sitting alone with for almost a week. Naomi looked at the surveillance footage. She looked at the photograph of Soon-hee leaving the laundromat. She looked at Jun Wu. She said, "How long have you known?" He said, 6 days for the confirmed intelligence. Longer for the suspicion. She said, "How much longer?" A pause. "Years," he said. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Naomi sat very still. She was doing the thing she did when she was processing something significant. Not reacting, not speaking, just absorbing, letting the full shape of the information settle before she responded. Jun Wu had come to recognize this quality in her. It was, he thought, one of the things that made her genuinely dangerous in the best possible sense. She did not react to the surface of things. She waited for the bottom. She said, She did not give him up voluntarily. No. She has been searching for him. Yes. And you have been, she chose the word carefully, aware of this. I am aware of it now. Before this, I had a suspicion I had not fully investigated. He paused. I did not want to investigate it fully. Naomi looked at him. He looked back. He did not pretend the statement was anything other than what it was. He had been a man who dismantled trafficking networks with his bare hands and strategic violence. He had faced operatives and informants and corrupt officials and every variety of institutional and personal threat. He had not been afraid of any of them the way he was afraid of this, a small woman in a slightly too large jacket, walking to work 3 blocks from her apartment, with a claim on his son that was older than his own. Not legally. Legally, the adoption was ironclad. He knew that. But legally was not the only language that mattered here. He knew that too. Naomi said, she has a right to know he is alive. He said, I know. She said, and he has a right to know she exists. Silence. Then, I know. She leaned forward slightly. Jun Wu, you have built everything around protecting Leo. You have made every decision in this situation, every single one, from the position of what you could control. And I am not telling you those decisions were wrong. I am telling you that this one, she gestured toward the screen, toward the image of the woman walking home in the early morning light. This one you cannot control. And trying to control it will cost Leo something that no security system in the world can give back. He looked at the screen. Soon he was stopped at a crosswalk in the footage. She was waiting for the light. While she waited, she reached into her jacket pocket and took out something small, a folded piece of paper. She looked at it for a moment, then put it back. The light changed. She kept walking. Jun Wu watched this on the screen in silence. Naomi watched him watching. She said quietly, "What was in her pocket?" He said, "I had the image enhanced." A pause. It was a photograph. The room went very quiet. In the next room, through the closed door, the faint sound of Leo's tablet. Train sounds, soft and rhythmic, the ambient soundtrack of a boy who had made peace with the world by memorizing the ways through it. Naomi said, "She carries his photograph." Jun Wu said nothing. She said, "Every day." He said, "Yes." Naomi sat back. She looked at this man, this controlled, careful, empire-building man who had crouched down on a subway platform to check a child's wrists before he did anything else, and she saw something in his face that she had not seen there before. Not guilt, exactly. Something more specific. The particular expression of someone confronting the gap between who they believed they were and what they had actually done. He had told himself he was protecting Leo. He had been protecting himself. From the grief of a woman who had never stopped looking. From the question of what Leo was owed that Jun Wu could not be the one to give him. From the thing that sat at the center of this whole story and had been sitting there from the beginning, patient and unresolvable. A mother who did not leave by choice, and a father who chose, and a boy caught between two truths that both deserved to exist. Naomi said, "We need to tell him." Jun Wu said, "Not yet." She said, "When?" He looked at the screen. "When I know she is safe. When I know she is not connected to the network, not willingly, not unwillingly. When I know that bringing her into Leo's orbit does not put him at greater risk." Naomi considered this. It was not an unreasonable position. It was also, she suspected, at least partially a delay tactic. But she chose to take it at face value for now, because some battles were worth picking immediately and some were worth holding. She said, "How long does that take?" He said, "I'm working on it." She nodded once. She stood to leave. And then something happened that neither of them had been braced for. The bedroom door opened. Leo stood in the doorway in his subway sweatshirt, his tablet in his hands, looking at them both with the specific, evaluated calm of a child who had been awake for some portion of a conversation he had not been invited into. He said, "Who is she?" Neither adult moved. Leo looked at the laptop screen. At the paused image of a small woman at a crosswalk, reaching into her pocket. He said quietly, "I've seen her before." The air in the room changed. Jun Wu said, Where? Leo looked at the screen for a long moment. His face was doing the calculation thing, the rapid private processing that happened behind his eyes when he was working something out that he didn't have full language for yet. Then he said, "In my dream." He said it simply, without drama, the way you reported a fact you had been sitting with for a while and had decided was safe to say out loud. "She's in my dream. She's always been in my dream." He looked up at Jun Wu. "She's crying. She's always crying. And she keeps saying the same thing over and over." He paused. "I never knew what it meant." Jun Wu's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "What does she say?" Leo looked at the screen one more time. Then, "She says, I'm coming. I'm coming. I'm coming." The room was absolutely still. And Naomi, who had spent 11 years learning to hold her professional composure in moments that would have broken most people, felt something shift in her chest that was not professional at all. Because the woman in the dream, the woman at the crosswalk, had been saying the same thing in real life for 7 years. And she had almost made it true. Leo set his tablet on the coffee table. He looked at his father steadily. He said, "Is she real?" Jun Wu looked at his son for a long moment. His face was doing the thing that cost him most, going from control to open, peeling back the armor one layer at a time in front of someone he could not protect himself from. Then he said, "Yes, she is real." Leo nodded slowly. He said, "Okay." He picked up his tablet and went back to his room. The door closed softly behind him. And in the kitchen cabinet of a single-room apartment 3 miles away, a photograph of a baby waited in the dark, as it had waited every night for 7 years. If you felt that, if something in that moment landed somewhere real for you, stay with us. Because what happens when a boy who has only ever known one kind of love discovers there was always another kind running parallel? That is the question at the heart of everything this story is about. And the answer is going to cost every single person in this room something they are not ready to pay. There are people in this world who are professional about patience. Not the ordinary kind of patience, the kind that waits for a slow line at the grocery store or a delayed flight or the long middle of an ordinary afternoon. That kind of patience is just time-filling. What Naomi was thinking about, driving home from Jun Wu's apartment on a Sunday evening with Leo's words sitting in her chest like stones, was the other kind. The kind that plans. The kind that watches and waits and maps and measures and constructs a complete picture before it moves. The kind that had been looking at Leo's school from across the street, not watching the front entrance, watching the side exit, the exit Leo had identified in his own notebook as the one he trusted most. The kind that had gotten close enough, somehow, to understand a 10-year-old boy's internal geography well enough to know where he would go if he was frightened. That kind of patience was not about time. That kind of patience was about precision. And precision, in Naomi's experience, always preceded something. She had not slept well in 3 nights. She was running 2 tracks simultaneously in her mind, and the space between them was getting narrower. The professional track, which told her that what she was involved in had moved well past any reasonable interpretation of her role, and the human track, which told her that reasonable was not a word that had ever applied to a child sitting too still on a subway car at 11:15 on a Tuesday night. She was still on both tracks. She was beginning to understand that she would not be able to stay on both much longer. She got home. She made food she didn't taste. She opened the 2 printed case files she had been cross-referencing for 2 weeks and spread them on the kitchen table and looked at them with fresh eyes. The eyes of someone who now knew more than she had when she first pulled them. The 2 children from the 2017 cohort. The same behavioral markers. The same phrase in both files. Demonstrates knowledge of events inconsistent with stated developmental stage. She pulled a legal pad and a pen and she wrote down what she knew. The network had not been fully dismantled 7 years ago. It had gone dark, changed structure, reconstituted under new leadership. The new leadership had, at some point in the past several months, identified Leo as a liability. Not because of who he was, a 10-year-old boy in a good apartment on the Upper West Side, but because of what he carried. What had been written into his nervous system at 3 years old in whatever room he had been in when Jun Wu's operation had come through. Leo had a near-photographic memory for faces. Jun Wu had told her this, carefully, in the way he told her things he had decided she needed to know. It was not the kind of thing that showed up in school assessments. It was the kind of thing you noticed in small moments. Leo identifying a face in a newspaper photograph he had glanced at once, 3 weeks prior. Leo describing the exact features of a man he had seen for 30 seconds on a subway platform 6 months ago. A child who remembered faces. Who had been present, at 3 years old, in a location where people with reason to hide their identities had operated. Who was now 10, and speaking, and capable of pointing at a photograph and saying, "I know this person. I saw them. I was there." That was not a child. That was a witness. And witnesses, in the world that Jun Wu operated in, had a specific life expectancy. She put down her pen. She thought about what Jun Wu had told her, that the insider who had sold Leo's location to the network had been dealt with. She thought about what she had understood from his silence about what dealt with meant. She thought about Priya saying, the last caseworker who filed a formal report was removed inside of 2 weeks. She thought about the man outside the school watching the side exit. She picked up her phone and called Marcus, who was Jun Wu's primary operational contact and the man whose number she had been given for emergency relay. Marcus answered on the first ring. She said, "The man from the school photograph. Do you know who he is?" Marcus said, "We identified him this afternoon." She said, "And?" A pause. The kind of pause that preceded information being measured before it was delivered. He is a contact of the new network leadership. Mid-level. Used for location assessment and security mapping. Security mapping. She said, he was mapping Leo's movement patterns. Yes. How long has this been going on? Another pause. We believe at least 3 weeks. Possibly longer. 3 weeks. Leo had been showing Naomi his subway notebooks for 3 weeks. Had been pointing at color-coded routes and saying, "This one I trust. This one I don't. This exit is good because you can see the stairs." For 3 weeks, a man on a street corner had been watching the same boy who was inside showing a social worker how he moved through the city. They knew everything. She said, "Does Jun Wu know the full scope of this?" Marcus said, "He is being briefed now." She said, "I need to be in that briefing." Marcus said, "He said you would say that." A beat. "He said to tell you to come in the morning." She came in the morning. The apartment was different at 8 a.m. on a Monday. Leo was at school, driven by a man Naomi now understood was not simply a driver. Jun Wu was at the kitchen table with 2 laptops open and a man she had not met before, heavy-set, quiet, who was introduced only as Vincent and who left the room when Naomi arrived without being asked. Jun Wu looked like a man who had not slept. This was notable because in every previous interaction he had presented the appearance of someone completely beyond the reach of ordinary human wear. He had 2 photographs on the table. He slid them toward her. The first was the man from the school. The second was someone she did not recognize. Older, well-dressed, photographed at a distance entering a building in Midtown. There was a third photograph beneath those 2, which Jun Wu kept face down. He said, the school surveillance was not a solo operation. It was coordinated. 3 individuals that we can confirm, possibly more that we can't. The man outside the school was the visible piece. There were 2 others we identified this week, one near Leo's regular transit route, one who has been present at 3 locations Leo visits with regular frequency. Naomi looked at the photographs. She said, they have been building a complete movement profile. Yes. Why? If they wanted to move on him, they could have moved weeks ago. Jun Wu said, because they are not planning a grab. She looked up. He said, a grab is loud. A grab creates attention. A grab, he paused, did not work the last time they tried it. He met her eyes. They are planning something that looks like an accident. The word accident settled in the room like a drop of something corrosive hitting a clean surface. She said, they want it to look like. Yes. She sat back. She had worked in child welfare for 11 years. She had encountered malice in many forms. She had encountered systems that failed through neglect and individuals who failed through cruelty and every variation in between. But the specific, premeditated, resource-intensive planning of harm to a child, the patience of it, the precision of it, the mapping of a 10-year-old boy's routines and preferences, so that when something happened to him it could plausibly be attributed to the ordinary cruelties of city life. That was something different. That moved past cruelty into a category she did not have a clean professional word for. She said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I have already moved on 2 of their outer contacts." He said it flatly, without color. She understood, again, what that meant. She said, "That is not a solution. That is a delay." "I know. Jun Wu." She kept her voice even. "Every time you remove an outer contact, you tell the people in the center that you are watching. You confirm that Leo is guarded. You may also," she chose the next words carefully, "create situations that your own people have to explain to law enforcement. Which creates exposure. Which is the opposite of protection." He looked at her. She said, "I am not telling you to do nothing. I am telling you that doing what you have always done is not going to work this time. Because this is not the same network you dismantled 7 years ago. This is something that has had 7 years to watch you and learn how you move and build counters to your methods." She paused. "They know your system. And they have been very patient." Silence. Then he reached across the table and turned over the 3rd photograph. Naomi looked at it. It was a man she recognized. Not from the network. Not from any surveillance photograph or case file. She recognized him from a press release that had been circulated through her department 18 months ago. A formal, official press release, with letterhead and signatures and the particular institutional respectability of something that had been very carefully constructed. He was a city official. Not senior, but positioned. In the right place to receive information about child welfare cases. In the right place to flag certain names for certain interested parties. In the right place to ensure that certain reports, filed by certain caseworkers, created certain professional complications for the people who filed them. She said, "He is connected to the network." Jun Wu said, "He is their contact inside the city infrastructure. He has been in position for 3 years. He is the reason 3 separate formal inquiries into network activity have been quietly buried. He is the reason the caseworker Priya told you about lost her clearances." A pause. "He is the reason I have never been able to go to the authorities." Naomi sat very still. She thought about Priya. She thought about the sealed file. She thought about the specific, institutional architecture of how a network rebuilt itself not just in the streets but inside the systems that were supposed to dismantle it, planting itself in the right rooms, the right offices, the right review committees, until the machinery of protection became the machinery of concealment. She said, "How long have you known about him?" 4 months. She said, "And you have not moved on him?" "No." "Why?" He looked at her steadily. "Because moving on him without everything else in place would close every door I have left to close through official channels. And because," he paused, something shifting in his face, "because Leo is 10 years old. And I am tired of building things that require me to be what I have been. I want to do this correctly. I want to do it in a way that holds." She looked at him for a long time. She thought, this is the first time he has said out loud that he wants to change the method. She thought, I do not know yet if that is true or if it is a thing he is saying because he believes it and cannot yet execute it. She thought, those 2 things might be the same thing. And they might not be. She said, "Then we need to do this right. Which means evidence. Which means documentation. Which means going through channels that are not compromised, and that is going to take longer than you want it to take." She met his eyes. "Can you hold the line long enough for that?" He said, "I can hold the line." She said, "And Leo?" He said, "Leo will not leave my sight." She nodded. She gathered the photographs and slid them back across the table. She was putting on her coat when her phone rang. "Marcus." She answered. Marcus said 3 words, and the coat she had been putting on slid off her shoulder, and she stood in the kitchen doorway with the phone against her ear and her face doing the same thing Jun Wu's face did, going smooth and controlled over the top of something that was not controlled at all. She said, "When?" Marcus said, 40 minutes ago. She said, "Is he?" Marcus said, "He's safe. He's with Jun Wu's men." But Ms. Bennett, a pause, he saw something. He saw what happened. And he is not saying anything. She hung up. Jun Wu was already standing. She looked at him. She said, "They moved on him this morning. At the school." The color did not leave Jun Wu's face because Jun Wu did not have that kind of face. But something happened behind his eyes that she had not seen there before and hoped she would not see again. Something that was beyond fear and beyond anger, and lived in the space between them where a man who had spent years preparing for every possible threat confronted the one that had arrived anyway. He was moving before she finished the sentence. And what Leo had seen on a Monday morning outside his school was something that would crack the careful architecture of his constructed world in a way that no subway map and no color-coded notebook and no laminated emergency contact card could reach. What Leo had seen was his father. And what his father had done, in Leo's name, for Leo's protection, with Leo 20 feet away and watching, was something the boy had no language for yet. But he would find it. And when he did, everything was going to change. Are you still with us? Because the next part of this story is the one where the love story and the danger story collide in a way that neither Naomi nor Jun Wu saw coming. And it is Leo, 10 years old, quiet, watchful, funny in small surprising ways, who is going to be the one to name what nobody else has been able to say out loud. Don't you dare go anywhere.